During this process, all those elements which he deemed common and insignificant fell out of the scene. There remained no trace of the tram itself, nor of the tramman, nor of the horses. Nor did he and she appear vividly. The verse told only of the night and the balmy breeze and the maiden lustre of the moon. Some undefined sorrow was hidden in the hearts of the protagonists as they stood in a silence beneath the leafless trees, and when the moment of farewell had come, the kiss which had been withheld by once was given by both. After this the letter LDS were written at the foot of the page, and having hidden the book, he went into his mother's bedroom and gazed at his face for a long time in a mirror of her dressing table. But his long spell of leisure and liberty was drawing to its end. One evening his father came home full of the news which kept his tongue busy all through dinner. Stephen had been awaiting his father's return, for there had been mutton hash that day, and he knew that his father would make him dip his bread into the gravy. But he did not relish the hash, for the mention of clangos had coated his plate with the scum of disgust. I walked bang into him, said Mr. Dedalus for a fourth time, just at the corner of the square. Then I suppose, said Mr. Dedalus, he will be able to arrange it. I mean about Belvedere. Of course he will, said Mr. Dedalus. Don't I tell you? He is provincial of the order now. I never liked the idea of sending him to the Christian Brothers myself, said Miss Dedalus. Christian Brothers be damned, said Mr. Dedalus. Is it with Paddy Sting and Mikey Mudd? No, let him stick to the Jesuit in God's name. He began with them. They'll be of the service to him in after years. Those are the fellows that can get you a position. And they are very rich order, aren't they, Simon? Rather, they live well, I tell you. You saw their table at the Clanghouse, fed up by God like gamecocks. Mr. Dedalus pushed his plate over to Stephen and bade him finish what was on it. Now then, Stephen, he said, you must put your shoulder to the wheel, old chap. You've had a fine line holiday. Oh, I'm sure he will work very hard now, said Mrs. Dedalus. Especially when he has a Morris with him. Oh, Holly Powell, I forget about Morris. Say, Mr. Dedalus here. Morris, come here. You dick-headed ruffian. Do you know I'm going to send you to a college where they'll teach you to spell cat? C-A-T. And I bought you a nice little penny handkerchief to keep your nose dry. Won't that be grand fun? Morris grinned at his father and then at his brother. Mr. Dedalus screwed his glass into his eyes and stared hard at the both of his sons. Stephen mumbled his breath without answering his father's gaze. By the by, said Mr. Douglas at length. The rector, or provincial rather, was telling me that the story about you and Father Dowland. You are impudent, deaf, he said. Oh, he didn't, Simon. Not he? Said Mr. Douglas, but he gave me a great account of the whole affair. We were chatting, you know, and one word brought another. And by the way, who do you think he told me will get that job in a corporation? But I'll tell you that after. Well, as I was saying, we were chatting away quite friendly, and he asked me, did our friend here wear glasses still? And then he told me the whole story. And was he annoyed, Simon? Annoyed? Not he. Manly little chap, he said. Mr. Douglas imitated the mincing nasal tone of the provincial. Father Dowland and I, when I told them all the dinner about it. Father Dowland and I had a great laugh over it. You'd better mind yourself, Father Dowland, said I, or young Douglas will send you up for twice 9. We had a famous laugh together over it. Ha ha ha. Mr. Douglas turned to his wife and interjected in his natural voice. Shows you the spirits in which they take the boys there, O Jesuit, for your life, for diplomacy. He resumed the provincial voice and repeated, I told them all at dinner about it, and Father Dowland and I, and all of us, we all had the hearty laugh together over it. The night of the white sun-tide play had come, and Stephen from the window of the dressing-room looked out on the small grass-plot across which lines of the Chinese lanterns were stretched. He watched the visitors climb down the steps from the house and pass into the theatre. Stewards in evening dress, old Belvederean, loitered in groups about the entrance to the theatre and ushered in visitors with ceremony. Under the sudden glow of the lantern, he could recognize the smiling face of the priest. The Blessed Sacrament had been removed from the tabernacle, and the first bench had been driven back so as to leave the dais of the altar and the space before it free. Against the walls stood companies of barbels and Indian clubs. The dumbbells were piled in one corner, and in the midst of the countless hillocks of the gymnasium, shoes and sweaters and singlets in united brown parcels, there stood the stout, leather-jacketed vaunting horse waiting its turn to be carried up on the stage and set into the middle of the winning team and in the end of the gymnastic display. Stephen thought in a difference to his repetition for essay writing, he had been elected secretary to the gymnasium, had no part in the first section of the program, but in the play which formed the second section he had the chief part, that of farcical pedagogue. He had been cast for it on account of his stature and grave manners, for he was now at the end of his second year at Belvoir and in a number 2. A score of younger boys in white knickers and singlets came pattering down from the stage through the vestry and into the chapel. The vestry and chapel were peopled with the eager masters and boys. The plump, bald sergeant major was testing with his foot under the springboard of the vaulting horse. The lean young man in a long overcoat, who was to give a special display of intricate club swinging, stood near watching with interest his silver-coated clubs peeping out of his deep side pockets. The hollow rudder of the wooden dumbbells was hid as another team made ready to go up on a stage. And in another moment the excited prefect was hustling the boys through the vestry like a flock of geese, flapping the wings of his soutans nervously and crying to the laggards to make haste. A little troop of Neapolitan peasants were practicing their steps at the end of the chapel, some circling their arms above their heads, some swaying their baskets of the paper violet, and curtsying in a dark corner of the chapel. At the gospel side of the altar a stout old lady knelt amid her copious black skirts. When she stood up in a pink dress figure wearing a curly golden wig and an old-fashioned straw sunbonnet, with the black penciled eyebrows and the cheeks delicately ruffed and powdered was discovered. A low murmur of curiosity ran round the chapel at the discovery of this girlish figure. One of the prefects, smiling and nodding his head, approached the dark corner and having bowed to the stout old lady, said pleasantly, "Is this a beautiful young lady or a doll that you have here, Mrs. Talon?" Then bending down to peer at the smiling painted face under the leaf of the bonnet, he exclaimed, "No, upon my word, I believe it's a little Bertie Talon after all." Stephen at his post by the window heard the old lady and the priest laugh together and heard the boys' murmurs of admiration behind him as they passed forward to see the little boy who had to dance the sunbonnet dance by himself. A movement of impatience escaped him. He let the edge of the blind fall, and stepping down from the bench on which he had been standing, walked out of the chapel. He passed out of the schoolhouse and halted under the shed that flanked the garden. From the theatre opposite came to the muffled noise of the audience and sudden brass clash of the soldiers' band. The light spread upwards from the glass roof, making the theatre seem a festive arch. Enshrined among the hulk and horses, her frail cables of lanterns looping her to her mooring. A side door of the theatre opened suddenly, and the shaft of a light flew across the grass plot. A sudden burst of the music issued from the arch, the prelude of the waltz, and when the side door closed again the listeners could hear the faint rhythm of the music, the sentiment of the opening bars, the languor and supple movement, awoke incommunicable emotion which had been the cause of all his day's unrest and of his impatient movement of the moment before. His unrest issued from him like a wave of sound, and on the tide of the flowing music the ark was journeying, trailing her cables of lanterns in her wake. Then a noise like a dwarf artillery broke the movement. It was the clapping that greeted the entry of the dumbbell team on a stage. This video is made for Navid Daria's page.